3 weeks before my son's wedding, a message lit up my phone. It was from Lily, his bride-to-be. The words were clipped, careless and final. "For the vibe, please don't come." I read it twice, then again, as if the letters might soften with time. They did not. For the vibe, as though my presence, the woman who raised her groom, would somehow spoil the air she wanted to breathe on her perfect day. Before the sting even settled, my phone rang. It was Anna, the wedding coordinator. Her voice was polished, professional, distant. "Mrs. Whitmore, I'm just calling to confirm. We've been told you won't be attending. Of course, your payment remains non-refundable. $85,000 covers the vineyard, the desserts, the catering." I could hear her tapping at her keyboard, already moving on. To her, I was just another detail checked off. I set down the porcelain cup in my hand, a keepsake from Sonoma, bought years ago with my late husband. A thin crack traced down its side, never reaching the rim. I had kept it all these years. I tapped it lightly against the table, listening to the hollow sound echo through my quiet kitchen. Then I answered, calm and steady. "Cancel the vineyard. Cancel the desserts. Cancel the chef. I own them all." Silence. Thick, stunned silence. I could almost hear her breath hitch, the shuffle of papers, the squeak of a chair. She hadn't expected that. None of them had. People mistake quiet for weakness. But quiet can sharpen. Quiet can redraw boundaries. That day I remembered, cracked vessels still hold water if you know how to carry them. If you believe women like me, mothers, widows, women overlooked, deserve their seat at the table, then listen. This story is about finding your strength when others try to erase it. I'm Margaret Whitmore. I'm 62. I buried my husband, Thomas, nearly a decade ago. Since then, I've lived in the house we built together, the one with the red brick porch and the roses I planted by hand. My son James grew up there, pancakes at the counter every Saturday, rushing out the door with his backpack half-zipped, calling, "Bye, Mom." He's still the center of my world. I thought when he found love, I'd be gaining a daughter. Instead, I was losing my place. Families don't always tell the stories we imagine. Lily came into James's life like a summer storm, bright, striking, impossible to ignore. She's younger, with a sharp taste for beauty. Everything had to look flawless. The venue, the flowers, the photos, and now apparently the guest list. The first time she visited Whitmore Vineyards, she thought it was quaint. She didn't know the vineyard stood on decades of my labor and my husband's vision. She didn't know the desserts she ordered or the menu crafted by Chef Michael were tied to me. I had chosen not to tell her. Funny, isn't it? How often we dim our own light to make others feel comfortable. How often we stay quiet when silence only erodes us. When Lily sent me those 10 words, "For the vibe, please don't come," she wasn't just striking me off a guest list. She was underestimating me. She was erasing me. And when Anna, the planner, told me the deposit was non-refundable, she pressed that eraser into ink. They assumed I would accept it. They assumed I would bow my head the way I always had. They didn't realize silence can sharpen when it's finally given voice. They didn't realize the vineyard, the inn next door, the very stage for their celebration was mine. So I smiled into the phone and spoke the words that shifted everything. Cancel the vines. Cancel the desserts. Cancel the chef. I own the vineyard and the hotel next door. That was the first domino. Once it tipped, nothing in our family looked the same again. I did not begin with power. I began with exhaustion, empty pockets, and a stubborn streak. Thomas and I once stood on a barren patch of soil no lender respected. The realtor called it a hobby vineyard, which was polite for money's sake. Thomas crouched down, pressed his hands into the dirt and said, "We can teach this to live." I believed him because his voice carried the kind of faith that reshapes stone when repeated often enough. That first winter the vines slept while the bills stayed awake. I worked days at a small clinic, nights at the tasting room we carved from a shed. Thomas patched pumps, learned to chase frost, read the sky like scripture. My sister Helen came on weekends with soup in a thermos and hands that blistered from packing cases. We laughed at ourselves, two women quarreling over labels, while Thomas tuned the tractor. We studied the land like a living thing. We learned where the frost clung, where the sun lingered, where water vanished and where it pooled. We lost harvest after harvest before one season finally yielded clean juice. A critic wrote a kind line. A restaurant poured our white by the glass. When James was small, he rode the forklift like it was a pirate ship, stuffing himself with grapes until his belly ached. He once asked, "Are we rich, Mom?" as I counted tips at the counter. "Not yet," I told him. "We're building something that won't embarrass you." He grinned, tucked a cork behind his ear and pretended it was a pencil. Then came the heart attack. Sudden, merciless. Thomas vanished between one breath and the next. The vineyard went quiet. I sat on the porch with a porcelain cup we had bought in Sonoma, hairline crack circling its belly, and chose work over rest. Grief demanded labor. I learned the parts Thomas had shielded me from: taxes, contracts, lenders who smiled at us when we were small and frowned when we dared to grow. I stumbled, paid dearly, then learned again. I bought the land next door when a family left. I bought the inn when its owner grew weary. Slowly, Whitmore Vineyards became vines and rooms tied together under one name. By the time James went to college, the appraiser whispered numbers near 60 million. I didn't tell him. I wanted my son to feel like a man, not an heir. I let him believe I stayed with the vines because of love, not because I also mastered ledgers and contracts. Both were true, but not the whole truth. Helen asked me once why I never told James. "Because power bruises if you hand it too early," I said. "Give him a railing, not a throne." She nodded and kept packing cases. We thought silence was tenderness. We weren't wrong. Not then. But silence grows habits in others too. It teaches them you will shoulder the weight and never ask for credit. It teaches them your name can be left off the program and the bill will still be settled. It teaches a bride she can design her perfect atmosphere and delete a mother. I kept quiet so love could have room to breathe. But quiet turned into a door slammed in my face. That morning, when Lily's message arrived, I set the Sonoma teacup down and traced the fine crack with my thumb. A vessel can be flawed and faithful at once. You just need the right hand to lift it. I chose to be my own steady hand. The next morning, the phone never seemed to rest. James called first. His voice carried that carefully measured calm he uses when nerves creep in. "Mom, let's not make this heavy. Lily just wants the day to feel easy. No pressure, no tension." He spoke as if I were the tension itself, as though my presence might cast a shadow. I answered carefully, my voice even. "I thought weddings were about family standing together." He sighed. Silence stretched, taut and thin. Then he repeated, "It's for the vibe, Mom. Just let us have this." Not long after, Lily called herself. Her voice wavered, almost rehearsed, her tears soft but deliberate. She said she worried I would make people uncomfortable. "You're strong," she told me, "and sometimes that can feel intimidating." I listened without correcting her, without giving fuel to the performance. She wrapped her rejection in worry but left no place for my dignity. I thought of the years I carried her fiancé on my hip, wiping jam from his face, mending holes in his jeans. Intimidating was a strange word for love that had bled its hands raw. By afternoon another number appeared. It was Linda, Lily's mother, her tone warm and polished. "Margaret dear, I hope you understand. This is their day. Best to let the young ones make their choices without interference." Interference. That was her word for a mother attending her only son's wedding. I thanked her politely and ended the call. When sweetness is turned into a blade, the cut stings deeper. Later Anna, the planner, returned with her measured tone. "Mrs. Whitmore, I'm confirming all contracts remain in place. The bride's family has indicated your deposit should stand. The event will proceed smoothly even if your attendance is not expected." Not expected. Another phrase for erased. She tried to keep her words neutral, but I heard the current beneath them. Money and mother out. I set my notebook on the counter and began writing everything down. Dates, times, exact words. I pressed record before the next call. Gaslight slips like smoke, but ink stays still. They might try to recast my presence as drama, but the record would remain. That evening, I forwarded my notes and recordings to Avery Chin, the attorney who had stood by me since Thomas passed. Avery read quickly, then spoke quicker. "Margaret, you are the contracting party of record. Do you still hold signature authority?" I opened the email folder Thomas had once labeled Iron Keys. At the top was a decade-old scanned agreement, bearing only my name. The authority had never been transferred. My pulse slowed as Avery confirmed it. "Then no one else can alter attendance terms while keeping your funding. At minimum, this is misrepresentation." I closed the laptop and looked again at the crack circling my porcelain cup. I thought of James's sigh, Lily's tears, Linda's honeyed blade. Each voice tried to make me smaller, each call dressing cruelty in reason. Yet tucked in an old folder the truth waited steady. And still the question remained. Should a mother take her own child to task with contracts, even when the law sat firmly in her corner? Should I be the one to drag legal terms down the aisle of a church? Love whispered yield. Dignity answered stand. I sat in that space between them, the weight of motherhood pressing against the weight of self-respect. I poured a little wine into the cracked teacup, watching the red gather without leaking. The vessel held because I knew how to carry it. I had carried silence for decades, believing it kept peace. But silence had been twisted into consent, and I could not consent to disappearing from my own son's story. Just after sunrise, Rosa knocked at the back door. Her jacket was zipped, her hair tied back with the red bandana she saves for pruning. 55, a widow too, she has walked these rows long enough to know each vine by touch. She stepped inside without preamble and placed a book in my hands. For you, she said. From him. It was the old Vineyard ledger, the one Thomas kept before I moved his notes into neat spreadsheets. The cover had softened with years, the spine sighed when I opened it. Inside was his handwriting, dates, sketches of clouds, circles around mildew, stars for the rose that thrived. Rosa pointed to the margin where he had written in block letters, "Hold fast." We sat together at the kitchen table. Morning light fell through the curtains in narrow stripes. I set out 2 cups, one of them the porcelain from Sonoma. The hairline crack gleamed like a pale seam across its belly. My thumb traced it. Rosa noticed and gave a soft laugh. You remember the day it chipped? I did. We were late, the tractor chain slipped. I ran for the thermos, caught a hose, and the cup flew across the porch, bouncing like a stone across water. I cried over ceramic. Thomas crouched, gathering the pieces. Don't throw it away, he told me. The crack tells a story. Besides, it still holds. We just have to carry it right. That night, he glued the handle back on and marked a thin line in the ledger beside a frost warning. A private joke I only understand now. Rosa flipped pages until she found one from the year before he died. Notes on canopy, a small heart beside the block we planted the year James turned 10. He wrote it so you wouldn't forget, she said. But you haven't. They have. She meant the ones arranging a wedding. All surface, no roots. I poured tea. Steam curled between us. Rosa cupped her mug and looked at me with steady eyes. Mrs. Whitmore, she said, they want to erase a story, not a seat. They think a vibe matters more than the woman who made the field ready. She pressed the ledger flat. You kept quiet so the fruit could speak. Now they're using quiet to pretend you were never here. Her words fell gentle but true, like rain sinking into winter soil. I traced the ink where Thomas had drawn a tiny cluster and written, "Third leaf finally sings." The page smelled faintly of dust and eucalyptus. Outside, wind shifted through the rows of roses. What do? I asked, to keep from breaking the cup in my hands. You carry it the way you always have, Rosa said. 2 hands. No apology. And if someone tries to take it, you hold tighter, not to wound them but to keep from spilling what matters. She tapped the ledger again. There's a way to stand that isn't a shove. I closed the book and set it beside the cup, the word hold fast aligned with the thin crack. Thank you, I said. Rosa shrugged lightly. He told me once you were the root and he was the trellis. Roots don't boast. But they don't move either. I breathed steady as new winter. She kissed my hair like a daughter, then slipped out the door toward the vines. The gate at Whitmore Vineyards is iron, painted black and heavy enough that it complains when I push it open. Beyond it, the rows drop into the valley, winter bare but steady, vines bound neatly like hands folded behind their backs. I stood there with my scarf tight around my neck, holding the folder Avery had delivered. He parked his sedan by the stone pillar and came toward me with that quick, efficient stride, papers pressed under his arm. Mrs. Whitmore, he said businesslike. We have options. None require shouting. He set the folder flat on the gatepost and opened it with 2 fingers. Inside, 3 tabs weighted like roads written in black ink. Option 1, suspension pending verification. We freeze all vendor activity until authority is confirmed. No contracts are broken, but nothing moves forward either. It's a pause, not a strike. He paused, making sure I followed. Option 2, claim of unauthorized contact. That clause states no one can alter agreements without written consent from the contracting authority. Since you never gave that away, any instruction from James, Lily, or her mother has no weight. We can nullify their requests. He tapped another page. And option 3, defamation. They suggested to vendors you were unstable. That gives us a path if you want to pursue damages. The wind threaded itself through the canes, dry and bare, sounding like paper tearing gently. The iron pressed cold against my palm. Avery's tone was precise, not unkind. He wasn't offering revenge. He was laying tools on the table. They'll say you're ruining a wedding, he added more quietly. Our response will be simple. You're protecting agreements that are yours by law. This isn't about anger. It's about contract. I thought of James's tired sigh on the phone. Lily's soft tears that seemed rehearsed. Linda's polished sweetness with the edge beneath. Every voice had urged me to yield for the vibe they said. Yield. 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 But here, inside Avery's folder, was another voice. The one Thomas taught me long ago. Hold fast. I opened the folder wider. The defamation section looked sharp on the page. All words about damages, reputation, costs recovered. I pictured a courtroom, cameras, James shrinking into the background. My chest tightened. That wasn't my road. But suspension pending verification, that one felt steady. It was clean, temporary, enough to remind them I was still here without tearing everything down. Avery handed me the pen. My hand did not tremble. "Are you certain?" he asked. I nodded. "This isn't retaliation. It's clarity. We suspend until the record is corrected." I signed my name, Margaret Whitmore. Black ink on white. No raised voice. No slammed door. Only paper. For a long moment neither of us spoke. The only sound was wind stirring the last leaves clinging to the vines, brown and brittle, rattling like dry bones. I looked down the rows where Thomas once walked, brushing tendrils with his hands, murmuring forecasts only the vines believed. The valley stood quiet as though it had signed with me. Avery closed the folder, tucked it under his arm. "They'll know by morning. Vendors must honor the suspension. Nothing moves forward without you." Thanked him. He shook my hand firmly, then left me at the gate. I stayed, one hand resting on cold iron, the other holding the key in my pocket. Silence takes many forms. Sometimes it is weakness, a word swallowed. Sometimes it is the strongest act you can choose. That day at the gate, silence was my answer. The vines stood motionless, but the wind did not. It swept across the valley, carrying with it a message no phone call, no polished word, no trembling apology could erase. "I'm still here. James, I am writing this at the same kitchen table where you once lined blueberries in rows to learn your numbers. The house is quiet. The vineyard is sleeping. I'm not sure if you will ever read these words. Perhaps they will live in the drawer where I keep spare keys and photographs too dear to throw away. You told me you wanted the wedding to feel effortless. You said it was for the atmosphere. I understand that wish. But ease without honesty ferments into something sharp. It looks beautiful in the glass, but it stings when swallowed. I chose silence for years, so you could grow without a mother's shadow narrowing your sky. When money gathered on the table like birds on a wire, I swept it off. I taught you how to keep an old car running and how to say you were wrong. I made you work summer jobs under your own name. I sat in the bleachers clapping like every other parent. I do not regret those choices. They mattered. But silence can be mistaken for absence. People fill empty chairs with their own stories, and soon those stories harden into rules. That is what I watched happen this week. Lily texted Anna, confirmed. Her mother called, sweetness laced with dismissal, informing me the deposit could stay but the woman behind it could step aside. I felt anger, then the old discipline returned. I called the lawyer. I reread the contracts with my signature. I opened the iron key folder and remembered what I hold, and what I refuse to give away. I will not shout. I will raise the standard. This is the lesson I wish I had taught you more plainly. Standards protect everyone, especially those who believe they don't need protecting. There is something else I should have said when we spoke. I know I am a strong flavor. Strength looks like judgment. Competence can sting like criticism. I cannot make myself smaller so that others remain comfortable. Shrinking is not grace. Shrinking is slow erasure. If I model it, you will learn to ask the people who love you most to vanish whenever a room grows fragile. I will not teach you that. I raised you to keep your word. A contract is a promise with dates attached. I signed for the venue and the hotel because your father trusted me to build structures that hold. When others spoke in my place this week, they crossed a line. I pressed pause. Not for revenge, not for spectacle, but because pause is the smallest action that still carries truth. I am not asking you to choose between Lily and me. That is a false choice and a cruel one. I am asking you to choose between a wedding that photographs well and a marriage that survives an honest boundary. The boundary is simple. Do not erase the one who paid the bill. Do not erase the one who raised the groom. Do not erase your own voice when it must say this is wrong, even when silence feels easier. You may be angry with me now. You may call me stubborn, you may call me proud. I can live with both. In my book, pride is the straight back you keep when you sign your name. Stubbornness is the refusal to abandon yourself to preserve the peace. We will need both if this family you are building is going to endure. Do you remember when you were 6 and dropped the little porcelain cup we brought home from Napa? You cried as if the sky itself had cracked. Your father glued it back together. We kept it. We still drink from it. The line around its middle tells the story of clumsy hands and careful mending. I placed the letter beside the porcelain cup tonight. If you come tomorrow, James, you will find them waiting together on the table. If not, they will keep their place until you are ready. I love Lily because you love her. But love does not erase the work two people must do. Tell her this from me. I am not asking for a spotlight. I am only asking for a chair with my name on it. The room is large enough for both grace and truth. If you read this one day, know that my silence was always meant to leave space for you, and my voice now is meant to leave space for me. Both belong in the same house. The doors swing on the same hinges. At 8 o'clock on Tuesday morning, the suspension order went out. Avery drafted the notices in his usual clipped style. No flourishes, just weight pressed into plain sentences. By 9, the dominoes began to fall. Anna the planner was first. Her voicemail came polished, professional and tight. Mrs. Whitmore, we've received notice to pause all coordination at Whitmore Vineyards until authority is clarified. Please confirm this is correct. She built her career on smoothing storms, but this was one she could not redirect. I did not return her call. The document had already spoken for me. Marco, the inn's general manager, sent an email next. Only one line. Per instruction. Blocks released. No new reservations until further notice. His lobby would have been full of murmurs and puzzled guests. Clerks repeating scripts they didn't understand. But Marco knew me well enough not to waste words. Then Michael the chef called. His voice was stripped of its usual warmth. Mrs. Whitmore, we have been told to suspend tastings, menu planning and prep. Should I have my staff hold? Yes, I told him. He didn't question me. Years ago he watched me dismiss a supplier for slipping in cuts beneath standard. He knew when I had drawn a line. Each acknowledgement landed like a stone in water, sending quiet ripples outward. My family had painted me as ornamental, a woman with a checkbook and no spine. But the industry now knew the current had shifted. My role was no longer background. I spoke little, gave only confirmations, then hung up each call. Silence carried the weight. Outside, February's air bit sharp against my cheeks. I walked to the storage house where rows of oak barrels stood in shadow. The scent of wood and ferment was thick and familiar. I laid a hand against one cask. The hollow knock it gave back moved through my palm. Each barrel was a contract too. Holding, waiting, not yet poured. The vineyard itself was still, vines pruned and bound, the land bare but not empty. Beneath the soil, roots stored their strength for spring. Things look dormant when they are only gathering. By noon, Anna, Marco, and Michael would have spread the word. Everyone in the chain would know the pause belonged to me. No explanations, no outburst. Just authority stamped clean across paper. I sat on a wooden crate and let the silence thicken. My phone buzzed again and again with numbers I knew, but I did not answer. Sometimes the strongest reply is none at all. Let them sit with absence. Let them learn the weight of what they tried to design away. When I rose, the barrels spoke again, the faint sound of wood knocking against wood. It was small, steady like agreement. That evening, they gathered at Linda's house to decide what to do about the pause that none of them could move without me. Word reached me not through family but through neighbors and through the silence of a phone that stayed dark. When no one calls, you know they're gathering without you. Linda's living room had turned into a war council. Chairs pulled close, voices sharp enough to leak through the walls. They spoke of backup plans, of vendors who might still bend, of vineyards 2 valleys away that might take a wedding at the 11th hour. But every idea hit stone. The industry knew my name, my contracts, and no one was eager to cross it. Linda's voice cut louder than the rest. We cannot lose face over this. The invitations are printed. People will talk. Her worry was not for Lily's joy or vows, but for the chatter of guests, for the sheen of appearances. For her dignity lived in other people's eyes. James sat at the edge of the room, shoulders bent, gaze down. I could almost see him there, tugging at his cuff, trying not to breathe too loudly. A son caught between 2 women, and the only tool he could reach for was silence. Someone muttered about moving the wedding. She can't control every acre. They didn't know how far my reach stretched, how carefully Thomas and I had tied each thread over decades. The suspension order had already rippled outward. Phones answered with polite refusals, calendars cleared with sudden conflicts, doors closed before Linda could push them open. Still she pressed, her voice flint against stone. We will not let Margaret dictate. He has always wanted control. The next morning my sister came to me. Eleanor, her hair now silver, her shoulders stooped from years of labor that never earned their worth. She found me among the vines where February winds pulled at the tied canes. Margaret, she began, soft as prayer. Don't push James into a corner. He's just trying to start his life. Weddings are fragile things. You don't want to be the reason it breaks before it begins. I set down the shears and wiped my palms. Her eyes pleaded, not angry but heavy with worry. She had lived long enough to know how quickly family cracks can widen. You don't want him to lose face, she went on. If this suspension stays, people will whisper that the groom's mother wrecked the plans. Let him stand tall. Don't make him bow before his in-laws. I studied her. For years she had stood beside me in the rows, keeping Thomas's notes safe, working in shared silence. Now she carried Linda's fear as if it were her own. Tell me, I asked slowly, is it James's face she fears losing or mine? The question caught her unprepared. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. My words were not sharp, just steady. A mirror turned toward her. I never wanted to erase him, I said. I wanted to stand beside him. But they asked me to vanish, to give the money and disappear. What kind of lesson does that teach? Eleanor shifted her weight, eyes dropping to the soil. Linda is terrified of gossip, she admitted. She thinks if Lily's family looks weak, people will judge. She'd rather paint you as the villain than admit she can't fund the picture she promised. There it was, the fear behind Linda's venom. Not hatred but dread of humiliation. She believed survival depended on image. I breathed in deep, letting the valley air anchor me. Dignity doesn't come from silencing others, I said. It comes from standing steady even under 100 eyes. I'm not teaching James shame. I am teaching him that a boundary is not betrayal. Eleanor had no answer. She only nodded once toward the vines and walked away, leaving me with the shears still warm in my hand. By noon the rumors reached me anyway, not from family but from strangers. A florist I had once hired sent a note. "Sorry, Mrs. Whitmore. Word is traveling fast." The whispers spread before I could catch them. First through neighbors, then through strangers. By nightfall, the story had hardened like clay. Margaret Whitmore, the wealthy widow, was sabotaging her own son's wedding. They painted me as a mother who clung too tightly, who couldn't let go. Anonymous notes slid into my inbox as though carried by shadows. One said, "Shame on you. Let them have their day." Another sharper, "Money doesn't buy love. Stop ruining things." No names, no faces. Only the confidence of people who believed what they wanted. They turned the deposit into a weapon. $40,000, suddenly a chain around Lily's neck. They whispered that James was crushed between an overbearing mother and a ceremony collapsing before it began. It didn't matter that I had written the checks quietly, that the contracts bore my name. In the eyes of rumor, I was already guilty. I showed one of the messages to Avery during our meeting. He read it once, adjusted his glasses and set it down with care. "People create stories," he said, "to shield their own shame. This is noise. Our filings are clean. Vendors know who holds authority. Let the paper speak, not you." "Do I respond?" I asked. He shook his head. "No. The more you defend against rumor, the more solid it becomes. Silence is not weakness. It's position." I folded the page and slid it under a porcelain cup. Tea had spilled earlier, bleeding brown across the paper's edge. The ink blurred, but the cruelty held firm. A cracked cup, a stained sheet, both carried truths no one wished to admit. Beyond the windows, the vineyard stretched steady under the cool air. Workers tied vines, trimmed canes, prepared for spring. Grapes answered only to water and light, not to gossip. Later, the conference room gathered its weight around me. The air smelled faintly of leather, ink, and old wood. The vineyard's crest, etched in glass, loomed behind the table where Avery laid out the documents. Two associates flanked him, both sharp-eyed, ready. He read slowly, his voice carrying certainty. "Whitmore Family Trust, revised 2017, establishes Mrs. Margaret Whitmore as sole trustee. Holdings include vineyards, hotel subsidiaries, catering operations and brand rights. No amendments filed. No successor named." Each word landed with finality. Claire, one of the associates, tapped her pen against a page. "Here," she said, sliding it toward me. "The brand protection clause states that any defamation or misrepresentation affecting the owner's reputation allows immediate suspension of services until resolved. This isn't punitive, it safeguards integrity. If they spread stories that you're unstable or that you are the obstacle, this clause covers you." I let the words settle. They weren't just legal armor. They carried the echo of Thomas's voice. His hand had guided mine when these documents were first signed. He had insisted that dignity was as valuable as the land itself. He had been right. "We don't cancel the wedding," I said at last, my voice even. "We suspend." Vendors remained tied but paused. "The door isn't shut." Avery nodded once. "Exactly. Suspension preserves leverage. It reminds them this vineyard is not theirs to dictate." He said, "They couldn't claim damages and they couldn't call me vindictive." The addendum lay before me, a single page, unadorned, waiting for ink. The clause I had pressed for was printed clearly. Services may be reinstated upon written apology to the trustee and public acknowledgement of her role as benefactor. Apology must be signed and read aloud at the reception. It wasn't about humiliation, it was about truth. If they wanted redemption, they would have to face what they had tried to erase. I signed my name, Margaret Whitmore, each letter steady as if carved into stone. The associates exchanged brief glances, not of doubt but of recognition. They understood I was not bending. "We'll circulate this within the hour," Avery said. "By tomorrow, every vendor will understand the terms. The family can choose acknowledgement, or nothing." I set the pen down. The quiet that followed was sharper than any lecture. In my mind I pictured James, Lily, and Linda reading those lines. Anger first, then shame, and, if they had sensed, the realization that doors stay closed unless opened properly. My son might feel torn, but he would also see. His mother had not been erased. She had drawn her boundary in law. The vineyard outside the glass walls lay bare, vines stripped for winter. Strength didn't come from raised voices. Came from contracts that held their ground when people faltered. The boardroom sat high on the ridge, glass on three sides, oak table in the center. I arrived before them, placed 3 glasses of water in a line, nothing else. No flowers, no distraction. James and Lily entered together, standing close but not touching. Linda was absent. I had been clear in my letter. This was not her conversation. I gestured to the chairs and we sat. My hands stayed folded. They shifted in their seats. Beyond us, a hawk circled in the pale sky. The hum of the air conditioner filled a minute of silence before I spoke. "Thank you for coming," I said evenly. "I will be brief. You have 3 options." I slid 3 envelopes across the polished table. Lily glanced at James and he nodded for her to open them. She read quickly, his eyes following hers. "Option A," I said, "cancellation with refund. All dates and vendors released. You receive your deposit back, less the administrative fees listed inside. You will need a new plan." I let the words sink in before tapping the second envelope. "Option B. A small ceremony at a public venue of your choice. I will not interfere, I will not attend unless asked, I will contribute nothing. It is yours entirely." Finally, I touched the third envelope. "Option C. The vineyard as scheduled, under conditions. A signed written apology from you both. A public acknowledgement at the reception of my role as benefactor. And a commitment that no vendor receives conflicting instructions again. I will attend quietly. I will not take the microphone. The point is recognition, not spectacle." No one spoke. The hawk drifted outside, the sun sliding across the table edge. James cleared his throat, faltered, then tried again. Lily placed the papers down carefully and folded her hands. "Mrs. Whitmore," she said softly, her voice trembling before steadying. "I never meant to hurt you. I was afraid of looking small in front of my family." She swallowed, then added, "I handled it badly." It was the closest she had come to an apology, but it was not one. I nodded once. Fear of appearing small makes people act smaller. My tone stayed even. "This isn't punishment. It's correction." James leaned forward, tiredness etched under his eyes. "Mom, is the apology truly necessary? Couldn't we acknowledge you privately and move on?" "It is necessary," I said. "You tried to erase me. The correction must be public to balance the harm. The promise is simple. Tell the truth about who funded this and stop misrepresenting who decides." His gaze dropped to the glass of water before him. He traced the ring of condensation with his finger. What if we choose option B? He asked quietly. Then you'll have a wedding on your own terms, I answered. A marriage that begins without debt to me. Some people prefer that. Lily spoke, her chin lifted in a fragile show of courage. And if we choose A? If you choose A, I said, sliding the papers toward them, the refund processes in 10 business days. Vendors become free again. The story ends. There is no shame in starting over. I added one more sheet to the table. A single sentence, a date and a time. Whichever you choose, I require signatures by Friday at 5. After that, the suspension converts to cancellation under the brand protection clause. Silence came, not the calculated kind but real. James looked out at the vineyard, lines of vines bare and waiting. Lily stacked the envelopes neatly as if order could lighten the choice. I need time, James said at last, his voice barely above a whisper. I have a lifetime, I answered. But the contract has a deadline. We stood. They left with the envelopes. I remained with the hawk outside, the low hum of the air, the valley spread beneath the ridge. The room felt clearer once the door closed. Not because I had won, but because the boundaries were drawn. Later that morning, the revolving doors at the hotel lobby caught me as they always did. 4 curved panels of glass, each one reflecting a different self. Widow, mother, owner, outsider. The brass rail brushed my coat as I stepped through, light from the Napa sun scattering across the marble floor. It felt like another threshold crossed. Marco waited near reception, clipboard under his arm. He was steady as always, mid-50s, sharp suit. He lowered his voice as he guided me aside. Mrs. Whitmore, he said, something happened last night. One of Lily's relatives called, tried to pressure the front desk into reopening reservations. Said you had no authority, that this suspension was personal. But the junior clerk, David, just 22, stood firm. He pulled up the trustee documents, pointed to your authority, and refused to override it. Marco allowed himself a small smile. He told them, Mrs. Whitmore signs every page. If you want it changed, take it up with her directly. A quietness settled in me. A young employee barely starting in the world had chosen to guard my name as if it mattered. That wasn't purchased loyalty, it was born. Thank him for me, I said, my voice softer than I expected. Marco tilted his head. He asked to tell you himself. A few minutes later, David stepped out from the back office. Nervous, thin-framed, tie slightly off-center. He held a small paper bag folded carefully at the top. Mrs. Whitmore, he said, cheeks reddening, I hope this isn't too forward. He set the bag on the counter. Inside was a box of loose tea from a Napa shop, the very kind Thomas used to buy back when we had just enough for tea, not wine or hotels. I read an old blog post, David added quickly. It was about you and Mr. Whitmore. The early days came back to me in David's nervous offering. He had read about how Thomas and I once brewed tea from vineyard herbs when we couldn't afford proper blends, how I called it my lucky ritual before meetings. His hands fidgeted as he explained. I thought you might like this. Just a way of saying we see you and we respect what you built. For a long moment I said nothing. Behind me, the revolving door turned with guests passing in and out, their footsteps echoing across marble. I thought of that old entry, half diary, half letter to Thomas, never meant for more than memory. To know someone had read it and cared enough to bring me tea, felt heavier than any contract I had signed that week. I lifted the bag as if it were glass. Thank you, I said simply. 2 words, but the boy's shoulders loosened as though he'd been waiting for permission to breathe. Marco touched my elbow, steady as ever. "This is what legacy looks like," he murmured. "Not just contracts or vineyards. The people who carry your story forward." I turned back toward the revolving door, the tea in my hand. My reflection doubled in the panels. Widow with lines on her face, girl with chipped mugs, matriarch with a vineyard behind her name. As I stepped out into the sunlight, the crisp air brushed my cheeks. I smiled softly, not because victory was mine, but because I saw clearly. I was not alone. My family of paper and blood might fracture, but another was taking root. The manager, the clerk, the workers who remembered Thomas's words. Chosen, not inherited. The revolving door turned again behind me. The storm that followed did not thunder. It crept in whispers polished to sound like truth. Linda had begun calling vendors, weaving her version of events. To her, I was not the widow who had held this vineyard together. I was the overbearing mother desperate for control. She told Anna, the planner, that the issue was my ego, not Lily's decisions. Then she pressed further. On the program, she insisted replace mother of the groom with a simple escort, anyone else. She doesn't belong there. Her cruelty was practiced. She never raised her voice. She poured poison like syrup. Sweet, slow, certain. I didn't hear her myself. Avery forwarded the recordings Anna had quietly saved. Linda's tone was polished, rehearsed, always circling back to her phrase, "We must protect the couple's peace." That night, a voicemail blinked on my phone. James's voice, thin with exhaustion. "Mom, we need peace. Please don't make this harder. Lily's upset. Linda's under stress. Maybe just let this go." His words splintered like glass about to break. He didn't ask for truth. He asked for silence. I sat at my kitchen table, the voicemail in one hand, the tea David had given me resting nearby. I didn't call back. My answer was silence. Sometimes silence is louder than any defense. The next morning, Avery sent a file through secure channels. I opened it carefully. Inside was a transcript. Anna had been pressured to rewrite the contracts. Linda claiming she had my blessing to step in as the new authorized contact. She wanted every line of communication redirected to her. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was deliberate, calculated misrepresentation. Avery's note was brief. "This is evidence. Effective. Irrefutable." I read the transcript twice, then again. The words were not fiery, they were worse. They were neat, efficient. Authorized contact to be updated to Linda Walker. Anna had resisted gently, but Linda pressed harder, her persistence smooth as glass, sharp as a blade. The words still rang in my ears. "The bride's mother speaks for the family." They were meant as fact, as if I had no standing, no history, no ink drying on documents that carried the Whitmore name. The trust papers lay open before me on my desk, my signature firm and unshaken, even under the shadow of whispers. Misrepresentation was not only cruel, it was unlawful. Contracts were built to weather storms like this. My hand drifted to Thomas's old mug, chipped but steady, a reminder of roots that could not be erased. Linda's voice, calm and sharp, wanted to write me out of James's wedding, out of my own family's story. James's plea still echoed. "Mom, we need peace. Please don't make this harder. Peace at any cost, even the cost of truth." I did not call back. My silence was not surrender. It was the pause between the strike and the echo. When the day came, I chose the high boardroom that overlooked the vineyard, windows stretching wide over rolling slopes. The oak table gleamed, polished and waiting, every chair filled this time. James sat beside Lily, their hands tangled, both looking more weary than resolute. Linda swept in with her husband close behind, pearls at her neck, arms folded as if to brace against the world. Margaret, the grandmother, slipped in quietly, her eyes carrying more sorrow than judgment. Anna lingered near the side, and Michael stood further back, arms crossed, a steady witness. Avery placed a folder before me, but I didn't lean on his presence. My voice carried without effort. "Thank you for coming. I will be brief. This isn't about blame. It's about clarity." I slid a clipped packet forward. 3 pages, crisp, precise. The vineyard will proceed only under 3 conditions. First, a handwritten apology from James and Lily, signed before the ceremony. Second, a public acknowledgement at the reception of who financed this event. Third, a written commitment from both families that no defamatory statements will be made about me to vendors, guests, or the press. The silence was heavy, but I did not carry it alone. Beyond the glass, wind pressed the vines into long, bending waves. Linda broke first. "This is humiliation," she snapped. "You want to drag my daughter in front of everyone? Force her to admit weakness? Do you realize what that will look like in our circle?" Her voice cracked, trembling. "You'll ruin us." I folded my hands. "I am not taking anyone's dignity, Linda. I am reclaiming my own. Nothing more." Her husband reached to steady her, but she pulled away, mascara streaking as her composure faltered. Lily's lips trembled, and James stared at the papers as though they might dissolve into something softer. It was Margaret who broke the hush. Her voice was quiet, but it carried. "Linda, no one is ruined by telling the truth. We all know who paid. Pretending otherwise, that's the shame." Linda shook her head, whispering like a woman cornered. "They'll laugh at us." I let the silence return, the steady hum of the air vents and the faint click of Avery's pen filling the room. Then I leaned forward just enough. "Linda, people already laugh at families who take money and erase the giver. At brides who uninvite a groom's mother while staying in suites her family built. The laughter is already here. What I'm offering is dignity, a chance to set the story right before it spreads further." James finally lifted his eyes. He didn't look at me but at Lily. His voice was low, almost breaking. "We should sign. It's the right thing." Tears shimmered in Lily's lashes as she nodded. "I never wanted it to be like this." "Then let it be otherwise," I said softly. 3 conditions. Nothing hidden, nothing cruel. Just the truth written and spoken. Linda sank into her chair, shoulders quaking, her protests dissolving into tears. I did not rise, did not gloat. I only said softly, "I'm not taking anyone's face. I'm asking for my name." Avery slid 2 pens forward, one before James, one before Lily. The papers lay still between them. Outside, the vines moved in slow rhythm as if reminding us that truth, like harvest, comes when its season arrives. When I returned home, the house felt weighted by silence. Thomas's chair stood empty at the end of the table, its arms polished by years of his touch. I set my bag down and let myself sink into the quiet. My body ached from holding too much composure. The kettle hissed, then clicked off. I poured water into the chipped cup Thomas had once defended. "Don't throw it away," he'd said. "A crack only proves it's been used." Steam rose in delicate curls as I stared at that faint line. A knock came at the door, hesitant, uncertain. Margaret stepped in, her hair tied back, her eyes swollen from a night without rest. She carried nothing but a folded handkerchief. She didn't sit until I nodded. Her words spilled fast, trembling. Margaret, there's something I never told you. Years ago, when Alan lost his job and we nearly lost the house, I begged you to co-sign the loan. You walked into that bank with me, signed your name, carried the debt. You saved us. I never said it aloud until now. I remembered the stale air of that office, the heavy pen, Margaret's pale face across the desk. I had carried that decision quietly, never seeking thanks, never mentioning it again. It had simply folded into the long ledger of sacrifices. Her voice broke. I swore I'd make it up to you, but instead I stayed quiet while Linda spun her stories, while James kept his head down. I let them erase you, the very person who once saved me. She covered her face, shoulders shaking. I stayed still, letting the silence settle. When she lowered her hands, she placed something small in my palm. A pearl gray button, edges dulled with years. From Thomas's wedding suit. I kept it when the jacket wore through. It should have been yours long ago. The button lay cool against my skin. I placed it beside the cracked cup. One had held tea, one had once fastened a vow. Both worn, both still holding. You deserved more than our silence, Margaret whispered. I looked at her, my voice quiet. We all did. Her tears soaked the handkerchief, but I did not move to stop them. I only kept the button near, the weight of a truth finally spoken resting in my palm. Dawn broke pale and silver across the vineyard. Frost clung to the wires, the roses stilled in the cold. I stood near the loading bay with a thermos in hand when James's car rolled over the gravel. He parked crooked, forehead pressed to the wheel before he stepped out. Not Lily, only my son. Taller than Thomas had been, his eyes steady yet uncertain. Morning, I said. Morning, he answered. We did not rush into each other's arms. Instead we walked along the first row, the vines bare as bones. His hands burrowed into his pockets. The same gesture he made at 12 when he wanted to confess without words. He began with a memory. Do you remember the year the pumps failed? You carried crates while Dad fixed the line. Your palms bled through your gloves. I told you to stop. You told me once the grapes won't wait, James said, his voice low. I remembered the weight of crates in my hands that year the pumps had failed. The straps cutting deep into my palms, Thomas calling out instructions, and James, still a boy, trailing me with stubborn determination. Mom, I'm sorry, he continued. I let people speak of you like a problem to be managed. I wanted quiet more than truth. Linda pressed. Lily cried. I thought if I kept my head down it would pass. Instead I made it worse. He paused, his eyes fixed on the frost-bitten earth. I signed last night. Option C. We'll write the letters. At the reception I'll say your name. Not because you forced me, but because it's true. I owe you more than silence. At the ridge, the valley spread wide before us, the light soft against the hills. He stared at his hands. You taught me to drive the forklift. Thought I was steering. I never asked who kept me straight when I swerved. I poured him tea from the thermos. He cupped the mug with both hands like he had when he was young and cold after practice. Mom, he said, I want to read something at the wedding. Thank you. Just clear. I want people to know how we got here. I want Lily to hear it from me. You chose a wife, not your mother, I said. That's right. But you can choose what kind of husband you'll be. Choose to tell the truth when it costs you comfort. Choose to guard dignity on both sides. I can do that. Then do it without turning me into a weapon. No debts. No anger. Only what's necessary. I will. The rumble of a truck echoed from the road. My fingers brushed the button Margaret had pressed into my palm, steady in my pocket, while I thought of the cracked cup sitting on my table at home. James spoke again, his voice quieter. I told Lily I was afraid of failing both of you at once. She said fear makes rooms small. I let ours shrink until there was no seat for you. I'm opening it again. That's a husband speaking, I said. I know Linda will be furious, he added. She'll say you lost face, I replied. But faces don't shatter when the truth is spoken. They mend. He nodded, relief softening his shoulders. Will you sit wherever we place you? I will. Will you taste the menu when the suspension lifts? I will. He exhaled and drained the tea. Thank you for the pause. I hated it. I needed it. The grapes don't wait, I said. But people can. I turned toward the roses lining the rows. Go home. Write the letter. Bring Lily tomorrow. We'll taste the soup your father loved. He smiled, boy and man crossing in his expression. I'll bring her. We walked back toward the loading bay. At the gate, he hesitated as though wanting to embrace me, but instead touched my sleeve lightly, as if testing the strength of a wire before trusting its hold. I'll be the husband I'd want our son to see someday. Good, I said. Begin now. He drove off down the gravel lane. Frost lifted from the trellis wires. The valley brightened one shade lighter. I stood a moment longer, steady on the earth, knowing something had turned that would not turn back if we carried it right. Later, an envelope arrived by hand. Lily's handwriting wavered across the front, the strokes uneven as though each word had argued with itself. Inside, on plain paper, the apology trembled in ink. Mrs. Whitmore, I was wrong. I let fear speak louder than gratitude. I let my mother's pride silence my own heart. Please forgive me. Please allow me to honor you properly. The words weren't polished. They didn't try to be clever. They were simply true. The handwriting trembled across the page, imperfect, unguarded. That was why it mattered. I set Lily's letter beside Thomas's cracked cup and the button Margaret had pressed into my hand. 3 small things, worn and ordinary yet unbroken. Anna called later that afternoon, her voice lower than usual. Mrs. Whitmore, I've redone the schedule. The guest list is trimmed to 40. No spectacle, just vows, music, and supper. Would you review it? She listed the details. Smaller hall, fewer flowers, a single quartet in place of a band. Stripped of excess, what remained sounded closer to truth than display. Then Michael rang. Mrs. Whitmore, he said gently, I added a soup. Onion. The kind Mr. Whitmore liked. I thought it belonged. I pictured Thomas leaning over his bowl at the kitchen table, steam clouding his glasses, the simple joy of a meal folded now into a wedding menu. Quiet, unannounced, but present. When James came by to confirm the changes, I gave him one instruction. Not the front row, I told him. Put me in the middle among the others. Not behind a podium. Not under a spotlight. Just a mother watching her son. His brows lifted, then softened. You're sure? I'm sure, I said. That is the dignity I want. The season shifted. The vines greened, air warmed, roses opened along the trellises. What had been planned as grand had turned smaller, gentler. Yet for the first time it felt real. The evening of the wedding, light spilled gold across the valley, every leaf catching a glint. 40 chairs stood beneath the arbor, placed with care, neither crowded nor distant. Music drifted on the breeze, mingling with the scent of roses set in jars on the tables. I sat where I had chosen, midway down the aisle. Not hidden, not exalted. Just present. Margaret at my side. Rosa 2 rows back. Marco and Michael nearby, steady as sentinels. James and Lily stood at the altar, hands trembling but not with fear. The officiant spoke of love as patience, of vows that bend but do not break. Then James asked for the microphone. His voice shook then steadied. Before Lily and I give our vows, I need to honor someone. None of this would exist without her. She gave more than funds, she gave labor, silence, and patience. For too long I failed to say it. Tonight I will. Thank you, Mom. He turned, his gaze meeting mine. It held no excuses, no pleading, only recognition. That was enough. Applause followed, warm and unforced. Lily stepped forward, holding the mic close. I wronged you, she said plainly. I let fear speak louder than respect. I told you not to come. Yet you came and you gave more than I deserved. Thank you for showing me what grace looks like. Her words were raw, unscripted. I believed them. That too was enough. The officiant returned to the vows. Rings exchanged. A kiss sealed. The valley lifted its cheer, soft but sure. Later, as candles flickered in jars, I set Thomas's cracked cup before me. I poured a stream of our newest vintage, pale gold filling the fracture lines. The vessel did not leak. Cups break, I murmured to the woman seated nearby. But they can still carry. The words felt like my own vow, quiet and whole. Then I lifted the cup and drank. The cameras caught it, the pause after the vows. 2 beats of silence stretched long enough to hold breath, memory, truth. I did not uproot my home. I did not sell the vineyard or stage a dramatic farewell. The separation, when it came, was quieter than anyone expected. I signed new agreements with Avery, revoked the old power of attorney, drew a clear boundary around my accounts. No more blurred access, no more pens in someone else's hand. The trust came next. A portion of the vineyard's profits would fund scholarships in Thomas's name, for the children of field workers, and another under Rose's. She had given her back to the Roses long before the land gave fruit. Now her name would carry something lasting. I felt no anger while signing, only steadiness. Paper can wound, but it can also protect. Weeks later, Marco asked me to speak at a training for new hotel hires. 10 minutes, Mrs. Whitmore. Tell them why names matter here. I stood before a row of pressed uniforms and told them about a vineyard once dismissed as worthless, about a cracked cup that still held wine, about a mother once told not to attend her son's wedding. Names carry history, I said. Respect is the soil where people grow. Heads nodded. A few scribbled notes. One young woman wiped her eyes. Afterward, Michael brought bowls of onion soup, the kind Thomas had loved. Rosa joined us beneath the arbor, her hands resting over the harvest ledger she still kept. Marco poured glasses of wine, raising a toast not to profit but to patience. Laughter rose at the table, young voices mingling with older ones. None of them shared my blood, yet they carried me more faithfully than family had in years. A chosen kinship, not bound by duty but by recognition. Outside, the vines shifted in the evening breeze, leaves whispering like applause. I thought, this is survival. Not breaking with noise but building with care. That night I wrote a letter, not to James, but to the woman I will be in 10 years, and to any mother waiting for a phone call that may never come. I dated it in blue ink, folded it once, and began with what I wish I had heard when the first crack appeared in the cup. This is not about winning. It is about standing. About the quiet you choose, not the silence forced upon you. About remembering that a life is not a guest list. It is a threshold you are allowed to cross. To my future self and to whoever is listening, if you are waiting for an invitation, stop waiting. The door to your own life is already open. You do not earn your place by shrinking, by softening, by silence. Be kind and keep your name. Love deeply but do not consent to erasure. Hold boundaries without shouting. Raise standards without shaming. When fear whispers, keep the peace. Ask, peace for whom? Choose the quiet that guards dignity, not the quiet that hides harm. If respect is missing, bring it. If it never arrives, take back your gift and keep your worth. Call things by their names. Then keep walking. When I altered the wedding, I punished no one. I corrected the story. Paper can feel cold, but sometimes it is the clean bandage a wound requires. I thanked Rosa for the ledgers that keep us honest. Marco for the steadiness at the gate. Michael for the soup that remembers Thomas. The young clerk who brought tea when the room turned sharp. And I told myself to remember James, standing in frost at dawn, choosing truth even when it cost comfort. I promised to keep a chair open for him and for Lily, as long as respect takes its seat first. That is the shape of peace I understand now. It is not silence and it is not the absence of hard edges. It is the presence of honesty. When the cup breaks again, and it will, carry it carefully with 2 hands. Speak less. Write more. Keep your name where it belongs. If you find yourself folding inward, step toward the light and wait there until your breath steadies. If loneliness presses in, reach for those who have shown they will not let go. Family can be chosen, growing like vines on a trellis, slow but certain. I signed the letter and read it aloud in the kitchen. The walls seemed to listen. Then I slid it beneath the old porcelain cup, paper resting under clay, story resting under symbol. It became a quiet anchor, weight enough to remind me that wholeness is not the same as perfection. It is the courage to keep holding together. Before we part, I would like to know, where are you listening from? A morning softened by coffee, or a late night where stories keep you company? Tell us in the comments. We read each one with gratitude. And if this story has touched you, consider subscribing, not only to hear more but to become part of a circle that believes in kindness, healing, and second chances. Thank you for giving us your time today. Wherever you are, carry this truth with you. Sometimes the miracle does not arrive with a knock. Sometimes it waits, quiet and steady, for you to open your heart. I pushed the vineyard gate until it stood half open. Wind moved through the leaves. The path waited.